So the thing is, just to kind of pare down our thinking on wisdom specifically, I think, and this is kind of integral to what I believe about just learning in general, that for myself, I have to always be open to receive this wisdom from wherever it may come, you know, and that may be from someone who I respect as a scholar. It may be from someone I respect as a colleague. It may be from it may be from a child. It may be from, like you said, you learned a lot from working with people who had different challenges. You learned a lot from, it may be someone that you may not, for lack of a better word, that you may not respect on an intellectual level. However, whatever it is that causes you to maybe break through a barrier, or whatever causes you to question some type of paradigm, to me, that's when we really start to reach those newer levels in wisdom, is when we start questioning old paradigms, saying, hey, does this thing still apply? Does it apply to this situation the way that I think it applies to this situation? Where did this piece of wisdom come from? Why do I believe it? And in what ways can I challenge it to see if it still is relevant? Right. So that, to me, and that was one of our earliest conversations, was where you said the same thing to me. It's like, hey, question everything I say, question everything you read, read the research behind the research, question everything. And of course it becomes that snowball effect, to where it's like every information source leads to another information source.
And that's where the learning begins, though, because then you're starting to learn things that you never even conceptualized. When you take this natural path of learning, like I've learned some of the most critical things accidentally by going down this path of trying to understand a particular piece of evidence, but because I couldn't conceptualize what they're talking about, I had to temporarily pause there, divert, understand what they were trying to convey by going to other educational resources, and it was just a natural process of learning full circle, and I learned a plethora of other things just by trying to understand this one aspect that I really had to get across. Because again, it goes back to making sure that T's are crossed, I's are dotted, and it's still hard when I'm always still doing it, but when I first started doing it, like I said, it was intimidating. But another factor I forgot to bring in is the I guess you could say, attacks. People, and it became so frequent that I started questioning myself again. But it was, people are like, "Oh man, you're just closed-minded. You don't want to believe in anything out there," and I had to really reevaluate, like, man, am I just being a closed-off asshole now? And the fact of the matter is that because of how much crap is out there, you're constantly saying no to a lot of things. But the reality of the matter is that in order for me to come to where I was at, I had to actually open my mind more. I had to be willing to accept the fact that, like, this is wrong. I was financially invested in things, like not to bring it back up again, but the whole FMS stuff. I spent $350 on education in FMS, and I had to, after being mentored and understood and experience kind of guided me away from it, I had to have an open mind to just be like, look, there's stuff that I'm going to have to disagree with, and just by nature of the industry we're in, when you start disagreeing with a lot of stuff, people will think that you're senile and miserable. But you gotta make sure. That's another area where you have to be really careful. You have to make sure that you're not coming across constantly senile and grumpy, that you're coming across critical and good intentioned, with evidence supporting your good intentions, right? So again, it was just a natural learning process, and also a natural mind shift, right? I had to be critical. I had to convey that I was, in fact, more open-minded, and I had to convey that I wasn't this aggressive, like, ha, I'm right, you're wrong. It's just like, look, I want to help and I want to be the filter, So that's
Right.
It's constantly trying to refine your processes so that you can better put out your information, right? Because at the end of the day, you could be right, but if you don't put it out right and you turn people away, then you've helped no one.
Right. And for me, that just what you said, I try to practice humility in what I do,
Yes.
and that's not coming across like a jerk. It's not coming across like, hey, I'm right and I'm gonna prove you wrong, because that very much is going to rub someone the wrong way. Even if you do prove that you're correct, you still haven't gotten through to that person, because they see you as aggressive, or they see you as a jerk, or you just haven't packaged that information in a way that anyone can receive it.
Right.
So the I mentioned the Mark Twain quote a couple minutes ago, and I found it. It says, whenever you find yourself on the side of the majority, it's time to pause and reflect. So
there you go.
That really sums it up to me. And one thing that I'd like to hear you reflect on is, we run in this fitness arena that, we are colleagues with some of the same people. So let's say, and I've heard, and never in a negative way by any means, but I've heard it come up before, well, I know Aaron believes this, and I believe that because we've debated it in the past, or Aaron and I agree on this. However, he goes this way with it and I go that way with it. So being, taking that Mark Twain quote into account, and knowing that, especially this might be someone that you spent a lot of time with, or this may be someone who at some point or another may have been in a supervisory position over you. So or it could have been a colleague that you came up with together, and not to look at it from the point of view of any specific person, but just say, when talking to a colleague or anyone else about a topic, how do you make your point? How do you, hold your ground? How do you maintain a position? How do you offer support for that position and not come across as aggressive, not come across as a jerk? How do you, like, what's some of the stuff, or even if you just want to reflect on a specific story, like, is there anything that comes to mind with that?
Yeah. I think the best way to get your point across effectively and without tension is, one, being open with it directly, right? When the first thing that you need to do is be in direct conversation with the person, not that you're arguing with, but just the person that you're trying to convey your information with. That's one thing I had to learn the hard way, is when you wouldn't have open dialogue, you created polarization. And even though you two believe two different things, because there was an open dialogue, those two different things that you believed became polarized and became worsened, and there became tension from it, right? So had I reflected on that and had open dialogue and patience, I think there's still 100% probably still would have been disagreement. However, there wouldn't have been polarization in the disagreement. I think that's the critical mistake, is creating polarization. Obviously, we see it in politics today, but specifically to what we're talking about, I've had firsthand experience with that, not having open communication. However, when it was not was, but when it is effective, the most straightforward way that gets my point across, and it's specific to exercise and fitness, is that you get to, this isn't debated philosophy and theology of empty words. I get to, what I say, I can show you right then and there. I can put into practice. So there's a perfect time with a coach that believed, had an entire philosophy built around a arbitrary set of rules, right? And so he took one of our younger coaches and had him do an overhead squat, but he had him do an overhead squat with specific boxed in arbitrary standards and said, see, look, this is why he's got all these issues. And instead of going down this path of like trying to explain the entire dilemma about how all of this was loaded in the fact that you're not accounting for anthropometrics. One, you're assuming that these arbitrary standards are correct. Two, it's extremely loaded in the fact that, hey, these are my rules. If you can't fit into my rules, you're broken. So now let me sell you what I'm trying to sell you, right? That just kind of falls apart on itself. Instead of going down all this philosophical rules and arguments and things like that, all I simply did was walk up to that younger coach, adjust his hand position based off his anthropometrics, adjust his foot position based off his anthropometrics, and he completed the overhead squat to standard perfectly with no issues. And I just left it at that. And it was, I don't want to say it called as BS, but, you know, we just put into practice my belief, and my belief stood firm. And my evidence was supported by my experience. And after that, I mean, there's what do you say to that, you know?
Right.
So, and again, it's still led to disagreement, because at the end of the day, if you're stuck in your way, you're stuck in your way, and your influences, if you're not, again, it's really hard to be open-minded and critically evaluate what you believe. But at the end of the day, there's still disagreement, but it was more the fact that I did it that way was effective in time management, was effective in practicality, and most importantly for me, I didn't care that I disproved the coach. I cared that I gave a huge insight to that younger coach.
Coach.
Like my mindset was focused on the younger coach, not like, ha, gotcha. You know, my mindset was like, boom, I just gave you an opportunity to see like experience and application supported with the evidence, critical thinking to go against status quo, and I got to apply it on you. Like that is priceless for him. Now, right. Whether he saw it as deeply as I did, we don't know, but, you know.
And never will know.
Right. And I was satisfied with that outcome. And there were many, many more times like that. Lots of tensions, and it led to just conversation breakdown, and the polarization happened, and you know, right. things got worse.
There's nothing you can do about that. The thing right. is, at the end of the day, that you feel comfortable with the way that you represented yourself, and that's all you can walk away from. Because what I found, you talked about the polarization and the breakdown of communication there, and you mentioned politics, because it's so prevalent in politics that at some point we all start coming from a position of ego and saying, hey, if you don't agree with my position, that means you have a problem with me personally.
Bingo.
So now I have to take your different stance as complete and total opposition to everything I stand for. And that is rarely the case. The thing is, you can believe what you believe, and you can be 100% right, even if it disagrees with what I believe, and I can still be 100% right for myself. Like, for me to believe something myself is not dependent on me convincing you that you're wrong. Mm-hmm. Although a lot of people take it that way, and that is simply based on ego. That's all it is. You know, I need to feed my ego by either belittling you or proving you wrong. And if I can't attack the logic of what you're saying, well, maybe I can attack a character flaw, or maybe I can attack your position. You know, I have a higher status than you, therefore my position is more valuable than yours.
And that needs to be distinguished between what can easily be misinterpreted as, I want to change your mind, I want you to see your error, right? There's a subtle difference to that, because ultimately, if you are just having the conversation with that person, you're not just having it, again, to prove yourself. You want to influence that person. So you are trying to expose potential flaws. You're trying to poke holes in the ship and see if it's still floating. So, and in a productive manner. So, and that's a very, very fine line. And that line gets even finer when there's no communication, right? So if we're polarized, I'm 100% right, he's 100% wrong. If there's conversation, it's the outcome doesn't change, but the severity changes. And what I mean is, yes, perhaps I'm still right, and perhaps he now sees it, or perhaps I'm wrong, or better yet, wow, I didn't even realize that I thought he was 100% wrong and I'm 100% right, but really we agree on 80% and only disagree on 20%, right? Sometimes you don't even realize that perhaps you're probably talking the same thing.
Right.
You just didn't have the communication.
Right. And what is the absolute value of that 80% versus the absolute value of that 20%? You might agree on 80% of all the stuff that is important, and you may disagree on the finer, minute details that are of lesser value. But, just like in politics, we see that all the time. People they may agree on 99 out of 100 things, but that one thing is what makes this party this party, and that party. And that's the only thing we start debating on, is that 1% of the information that we disagree on. So
right. It's when we get focused too much on the group and too much on the subject and not enough focus on the individual thought. Right. We put the group before the individual. And just one more quick time. There's a positive time. Another coach at the most recent facility. We did have open dialogue. We did talk all the time. We clicked well. So there's definitely some benefits there. But we disagreed on a lot of things too. But I specifically remember our conversation. I'm a pin squat guy. He's a box squat guy. Fundamentally, we don't have to go down the sciences, but essentially the training behind it and what they stimulate and the focus on concentric strength, that they both share the similar values. And we talked it out and we hashed it out, and I gave my opinions. Hey, I like the pin squat. I think it's better for beginners too. If you fail to lift, this, that, and the other. He gave his argument. Hey, I like the box squat. It gives me something to shoot for. It puts me in the right position. And essentially we realized that we disagreed, but we didn't disagree with evidence. We disagreed in preference, and the preference isn't anything to worry about, because his experience brought him to his preference of the box squat. And my preference brought me to the position of the pin squat.
Right.
Good dude. Matt, he's out at Benning now, coaching up the soldiers there, and I'm at Bragg now, coaching up soldiers here. So, it's and honestly, I just talked to him yesterday. We'll be going to the same meet in Atlanta, so it'll be exciting to see him again. And I'll give him hell for box squatting, and he'll give me hell for pin squatting, and it'll be fun,
Right. And he's at that state-of-the-art facility out there, so it's I just love seeing him post pictures of it. I mean, it's awesome doing big things out there. And everything that we said circles back around to a couple things. Number one is, my underlying goal is for me to continue growing in knowledge, for me to continue growing in wisdom, however that comes about. So I can stand in front of a person and I can learn the right way to do something from that person, or I can learn one of many wrong ways to do something. I'm still learning from that person, and I'm still in a position that whatever information I put out, I'm hoping is adding to some aspect of either that person or maybe a bystander that's listening, or whatever the case may be. That my only goal is to A, better myself, and B, put out good, solid information that someone else can learn from. And when in a position of challenge, I myself, first of all, I try not to take anything personal, because even if it comes across as a personal attack, I try not to take it as personal. Second of all, I start to argue the logic and the reasoning of that argument. I don't attack a person. You know, you're not an idiot who got trained by another idiot, and that's why I believe that idiotic belief. No, we're not going there. We're not going there. It's like, hey, this is your belief. Let's start looking at the premises that led to that belief and see if there are any flaws in any of those premises.
And that's so much more productive, right?
Right.
Because you're going to help influence that person.
Right. Right. And I myself know that doesn't always go over well. Sometimes I get perceived as, you know, that robotic, meticulous type person, but I mean, but you can't say that it's not valid, you know, that my point is not valid. Mm-hmm. It is valid. It's not personal, but this is how I receive and process information in a very linear, logical way. So let me present that argument to you. And in my defense, most people's arguments don't stand the test of that logical assessment, you know.
Sure. Right.
So
I think you brought up a good point too when you said bad experiences are still learning points, and that instantly made me think of my time at the D1 level with the strength and conditioning team at a particular school. And prior to this experience, you know, D1 coaches I thought were the hottest stuff on the world. I mean, that's the ultimate goal. Those guys are the top dogs for strength and conditioning. And I got there expecting a heck of a lot of wisdom and experience to be instilled on me. And I got the experience and I got the wisdom, but what I realized is that I was just devastated. It was a total shit show. It opened my eyes to what was going on at the D1 level. And even though it was a bad experience and I was miserable there and I was so frustrated with like fundamentals being thrown out the window and you know, logic and deductive reasoning and critical thinking with coaching, you know, whatever that I was upset with at the time, what I realized is I still learned. Two, the biggest thing I took away from that was in the most humbling sense, my confidence in my ability as a coach went through the roof. Because when I experienced, like when I got to the top dogs, when I got to the D1 level, I was like, oh man, I'm so nervous. I'm around these head honchos. And then when I realized, I was like, are you kidding? For real? You know, it really gave me confidence. Like, man, my upbringing and my learning has really paid off, and my experiences and my methodical understanding has really paid off. Like I am on par, and at the time, because of how pissed I was, it's like I am way better than these guys. This is some garbage coaching and all that. Not the point, but it was a bad experience that I learned from and gained an immense amount of confidence from, and it was from that point on that really propelled me forward to like, look, I'm done hiding in the corner as a coach, and like I'm putting myself out there. I know what the hell I'm doing. It's time to start training. Like let's get these people right. Let's get this shit show under control. You know?
Right. Absolutely. So that's why I feel like any and everything has opportunities for growth involved in it.
Bingo.
And if we can be honest for a second, it is those really negative and or painful experiences that are really the best learning opportunities.
100%.
Of course, we
100%.
hate it, but after we get through it, it's like, yeah, you know, that was painful, and maybe I hated every second of it, but I learned so much, and that's the only way I could have learned that lesson.
100%. Yeah, absolutely.
So that kind of brings me to another point that I wanted to ask you about. You know, outside of those negative opportunities, yeah, they come and we love the lessons that they provide, but what is something that comes to mind as one of your most profound positive learning opportunities?
Man, I'm really glad you asked this, because if you weren't going to ask, I was just going to interrupt and be like, I want to share a story. So this has huge implications for anyone that's just an up and coming coach, and what I mean is this. this was more recently in the past 10 years of coaching. This happened more recently, 3 or 4 years ago now. And it has been seared into my brain because it was the first time, and at that point, 7 years of coaching, that I had, not that I had, but that I finally opened my eyes and realized that I learned something from sheer experience, right? Just a wisdom of information, not knowledge, not like intellectual, just pure wisdom. It was like I met Gandalf. It was incredible, and I'll never forget the experience. And the important part is kind of the story that I want to get across. So I was coaching back in Arizona, and I had an opportunity. Honestly, he wasn't even coaching. He was a member at the gym that I was training. He wasn't getting coached by anyone. He was just a member there. And we got to talking, and he took an interest in me, and I never knew why initially. Older gentleman, Bob was his name. And over the course of weeks, training gym, hey Bob, what's going on? One day he brought in all these bumper plates, and then he brought in an Eleiko bar, and he's like, Aaron, come here, like I want you to work on this Eleiko barbell. And I was blown away. And for those that don't know, the Eleiko barbell is like a $1,000 to $1,500
Right.
bar. It's the gold standard for the sport of weightlifting.
Right.
And I was like, Bob, what, like bumper plate? I saw this guy. He was the guy in the gym doing like quarter squats and could barely move and all this. So I just thought he was like just some old nobody. And that in and of itself shows an immense amount of wisdom of just how humble and chill he was.
Right.
I was like, Bob, what are you doing with an Eleiko barbell? I was like, Bob, do you know what kind of bar this is? Like, that was my initial reaction. I was like, Bob, do you know what you have here? Mm-hmm. And man, let me tell you what, I got humbled real quick. When I said that kind of stuff, because he was like, Aaron, he was cool about it. Because again, this is just how wise this man was.
Right.
I've noticed the more wise you are, like the less things bother you. You don't get bothered by what people say. And again, it's just seared into my brain. He came up and talked to me, and he was like, look, I was an Olympic level weightlifter for the United States of America. And my jaw dropped. I was like, Bob, this guy that's over here quarter squatting, and I found out the reasons why he's quarter squatting, knee replacement, shoulder replacement, the issues of making it to that elite level. So anyways, he got to talking, competitive lifter in the 80s, and it wasn't until actually his master years. So again, there's a level of wisdom, but then there's the next level of wisdom when you can make it as an athlete from your young years all the way into the master level. Master's levels being, I think, 35 or 40 plus. Right. Don't quote me on that. I'm sure you know better than me.
Right.
But so he made his career in the sport last a very long time. And he was throwing out names of like these Russians that he used to train with, like that you see on old YouTube videos. It's like, oh my God, like that was your buddy? Like he brought in the weight belt. I can't remember his name. I can remember his name. I just don't know how to pronounce it. He brought in the weight. This is another funny thing. The weight belt that he used, that he just nonchalantly walked around the gym with, was the weight belt of this like distinguished Russian weightlifter. And he was just using it nonchalant. I was like, Bob, are you kidding me? Like, I was just so blown away. Anyways, he makes it to the international stage in the Masters division, late 90s, early 2000s, still hanging out with the Russians, still hanging out with the Slavic nations, a lot of influence there. And so after that, this was weeks of him watching me squat and power clean and snatch and all that, and he never said a word. And it's like, Bob, it's like, teach me, man. Mm-hmm. And he was just like, okay. And here is what really got seared into my mind. And this is critical for coaches to take away. If there's nothing you hear from this next hour and a half of podcasting, it's right here. When that man coached me, and you have to understand, the last 7 years of coaching for me was like being in the literature, being critical. But even when I was hands-on and experienced, I was talking about angles and moment arms and like, look, check out this flaw. Like, when I was coaching up an athlete, I was like, look, this is falling apart because of this, and this. And it was really good. It was really effective. And it was really analytical and high quality stuff. But Bob was at such a level of wisdom, and he already knew who I was. Like, he knew I was a coach. When it came his time to coach, my expectations was like, oh man, this guy's going to put my analytics to shame. This guy is going to show me what it means to be a coach. And he did, but not in the way that I thought. Mm-hmm. And I got ready to lift, and I hit my snatch, and I thought he was going to come over to me and do what I did, but just on a magnified level, like tactile touches, put your knee here, put your knee here, put your foot there, get your chest here. You know, I thought he was going to be extremely analytical. Dwayne, Bob comes up to me and he's like, hey man, this next rep, do what you just did. Just relax for me this time. And he turns back around and sits down and watches me again. That was it. That was his coaching cue. That's all he did. And I'd hit it, and he'd come back over. He'd be like, hey man, just hold it like this for me now. I mean, the most subtle, the most generalized, what you would perceive to be generalized, but again, if you were there, the experience and feeling that wisdom, and I finally had my eyes open and understood. I was like, what that man just told me was 45 years of experience and wisdom put into what he just needed to say. He didn't need the analytics. He knew that I knew how to lift. He knew I was a coach. He just told me what I needed to hear. Mm-hmm. Let me say that again. He just told me what I needed to hear. 45 years of the Olympic lifts, and he told me, hey, relax. Mm-hmm. And that changed my world, Dwayne. That changed my world. That is, you can't learn to be that kind of a coach. You have to just live that. You have to get there. And right. For the next several weeks, never once did he say like, hey, because of your toe angle here, because of your chest angle, hey, because not dogging on that stuff. It's good. It's good content. It's good quality. It helps me learn as a coach. But that level of wisdom, he was just there to tell me what I needed to hear. I had been lifting weights and doing Olympic lifting religiously for 3 years at that point. And I never learned so much than that year with Bob. I spent a year with that guy that I can't believe I had the chance to have what I thought just this old broken down dude who was doing quarter squats this whole time. And from that moment on, when I was in there, I would make sure that I could catch him for at least a lift or two. You know, I wouldn't say he was like my coach and programming for me and all that. No, but for that year I was there, he would be in there, and all of that accumulated wisdom, all that accumulated experience, he'd be like, Aaron, hey, check it out, man. Mm-hmm. Just hold the bar like this now. Stop what you're doing. Relax. All right, go ahead and set up like this. Now do your lift. You know, just so smooth. So, I mean, that is coaching that cannot be replicated. And that was the one of the best, if not the best experiences I had, just because of how much wisdom was there. And second to Bob, if not on par with Bob, was my old mentor at Uncommon Athlete, Dennis. Again, just another guy that was sheer wisdom. Unfortunately, I didn't appreciate and didn't have the vision I did of Dennis. I wasn't matured enough at that point to really receive what he was putting out for me, and I would kill to change that. But fortunately, what I can say is I still did learn from Dennis, and Dennis was insanely amazing. But I was able to apply that with Bob, right? I didn't make that mistake with Bob. I learned from Dennis, and Dennis, and I'm so thankful to still be in contact with Dennis. But I made sure not to make that mistake with Bob. And Bob, I mean, that is coaching that you'll never, ever be able to put in a textbook.
Right. That's you couldn't have paid for that no. level of coaching, no. You know, and just to put things into context, of course, I know more about your story and your background than anyone who might be listening. But when you were training or being mentored by Dennis, that was before your D1 experience. So
Correct.
you still had a certain fixed view of what the landscape had to offer, and you were locked into that progression in your mind. So it would have been very easy for you to discount some of the lessons that maybe Dennis was trying to teach you, but you just weren't in the best place to receive that wisdom. It took another, experience for you to put that in perspective, and now you can go back and reflect on the time you spent with Dennis, and it could have very well set you up for your experience with Bob. So these things happen in their due time, and it's easy to always look back on things as negative, like, oh well, I had such a great opportunity and I just kind of just let it go, or I didn't take advantage. Well, that opportunity happened the way it did because that's the only way it could have happened. So respect that lesson, move on, and hopefully draw something from that experience that can be applied to the next time you're in that situation. The next time you do meet a dentist, well, this time his name is Bob, and soak up everything, and I can just imagine, every word that came out of Bob's mouth, and you're just foaming at the mouth, like knowing what kind of gold nugget is he gonna drop on me today. That that's like Moses coming down off the mountain holding a stone tablet, and it's like, I mean, I could just imagine the level of knowledge that this guy just acquired, over the course of his lifetime, and that is a direct reflection of what you said in one of our earlier casts, just about the experience of the coach is in taking this vast amount of complicated and complex knowledge and experience and boiling it down to just something as simple as, hey, try this out, or, just, move your feet just a little bit, or, hey, try this hand position on, let's see how that feels, or, and I think you and I think a lot alike as far as being meticulous, wanting to understand every little step in the logical sequence of how to go about this, but the real coaching, and I have a Bob type experience that was not quite as profound, but it's still maturing, and that's with Coach Steve.
Absolutely.
He's Coach Steve is exactly the same way. National level coach, level 3 certified. I mean, he's just a wealth of knowledge in the sport of weightlifting that is backed by his personal experience and his personal experience as a weightlifter, but then all of the opportunities he's had to distill that knowledge into his athletes. It's just, I couldn't be in a better position to learn from someone. And and his coaching is very similar to Bob's to the extent that it's so funny because, when I started lifting, like, I knew my lifts were horrible. Like, I knew they were. And it's like, so I'm lifting and I'm executing these moves and I know they're terrible. But he never said anything negative. He would just make a subtle correction, like, try this, or hey, just do it again. Just do it again. Just do it again. And it's like, tell me exactly what I need to do. And I'm watching videos, I'm reading books, I'm doing all this stuff.
But you know what? It's because he knows that you're doing all that he's not, you know what I'm saying? Like, that's where the wisdom comes in. He knows that you're doing that stuff. So he's giving you what you need. Right.
And that takes me to I had another interesting story, and ironically it had nothing at all to do with sports. This is a mentor of mine, actually, in terms of business, and I met with her yesterday. She tells me the story about one of her mentors actually, and I guess he told her, he said something about, you can be the person that wants to learn to swim, and you can go one of two ways about it. You can sit down and you can study swimming for the next 4 years, and at some point you're gonna fall in a pool and you're probably gonna drown. or You can be the person that just goes and jumps in the pool the first day, and you can actually be in the water for 4 years, and you're going to be okay. You're going to learn more from the practicing and failure, or practice and practice and practice, and for me, and I believe you're probably the same way, to be more of a cerebral type person, I want to see something. I want to see the text. I want to see the literature. I want to read the book. There has to be a marriage between the theory part of it and the actual practice. Like, there's no substitute for good practice. And in terms of, we're talking specifically about weightlifting, but it applies to any athletic endeavor. There's no exchange. There's no substitute for actually having your hands on that bar and moving that weight around. There's no way to substitute that.
And to go right off of that is one area that just I still struggle with in terms of being ill by it and being annoyed by it. Is it's mind blowing. I understand taking some time off. I understand being in a phase or out of a phase. But what I don't understand, and what is just morally wrong to me is that coach that isn't doing anything. Just he isn't lifting, he isn't exercising, he isn't training, he isn't running. He's living off of monsters and cookies. He's doing whatever. It's like, one, you're not practicing what you preach and you're not putting off a good vibe. But everyone knows that argument. My argument, my critical statement to that is you are not as good of a coach as you could be, because you're losing experience. It's not that you're not no longer increasing experience and you're just stopped at experience. Your experience level is actually decaying. You're withdrawing experience. People think that when you gain experience, it just stays with you and you have it, and that's completely false. If you don't use that experience, you lose it. And what I mean by that is that experience is now, it's history. It's not fresh in your mind. You don't realize what that lift is. You don't realize anymore what that person's going through. And because of that, when you're sitting down writing on paper your programming, it's screwing up your programming. You have no idea what you're doing, programming and coaching, if you are not, at least, I understand you may be busy or whatever, but you don't know what you're doing anymore if you're not in the trenches doing it. You just don't. This doesn't have to be, this isn't even the argument of leading from the front. This is the argument of the fundamentals of just knowing what the hell you're doing. If you're not exercising, if you're not lifting, if you're not running, whatever it is that you're passionate about, if you're not doing that, if you're not practicing it, you not only no longer have an increase in experience, but your experience is decreasing, and you're losing your ability to program and coach. You don't know what you're doing anymore, and that is so critical to me. And that is, I know I'm almost sounding a little heated over it. It's just the frustration that I still am working over and trying to figure out how I can change that, other than just calling people out, But it's devastating to see. To be honest with you, it's becoming more prevalent. There's this mindset that, like, coaches are somehow now intellectuals rather than the old school nitty gritty. Like, hey, and I get it. There was the time where if you just sweated and worked out hard and had a six pack, you were a coach. And again, we had that radical pendulum swing now, where you've swung the pendulum to the other side, where the coach is just this intellectual who thinks because he surrounds himself with great people and great past experiences, he's now above it all and doesn't have to do it. No, like, you have lost your ability to coach if you're no longer doing your training, if you're no longer lifting weights, if you're no longer running. You just,
right.
You're not as good as you should be. And right. And that should if that morally doesn't affect you, then I question if you should still be doing what you're doing.
Right. And these are perishable skills, and
yes.
And at whatever point you make the determination that you have gotten off of your success journey, or your journey to achieve wisdom, then you immediately start declining. Like you said, it's this whole game is swimming or rowing against the tide. So if you're not making the effort to keep moving forward, you gradually start moving backward because the sport moves on. And while I agree with you 100%, you know me, I like to play devil's advocate. So
and I love devil's advocate, so we're good.
So I want to bring up a point that is not at all contrary to what you said, but it's a slightly different perspective.
Sure.
So consider this. I feel like we oftentimes find ourselves in position to want to question a coach based on what we see in front of us at the time. To say, hey, at some point, if that wise coach stays around long enough, he'll get to the point where he is physically not able to perform some of the things that he is perfectly adept at coaching. At some point, the athletic abilities of his athletes will surpass his. That's just nature.
Well, not only that, but they probably always been past his. Yeah,
right.
For sure.
Right. So we've talked about ego. We've talked about mental strength. At some point, that athlete may want to question his coach, saying, "Oh, well, you can't do what I'm doing, so why should I listen to you?" And the thing is, I had to come up with an analogy, and this actually. I talked about Steve earlier, and Steve told me that he had experienced this directly. That
wow, no joke.
Yeah, as he was trying to build his network and build relationships, and he had approached certain gym owners and is like, hey, I'd like to offer my weightlifting coaching, or I'd like to partner with you on something, and he said he was like, yeah, he's like, the guy turned me down. He just totally blew me off. And he's like, I guess, and this is Steve talking. He's like, I guess he looked at me and said, I don't fit his paradigm of what an Olympic weightlifting coach looks like. Mm-hmm. So he just totally blew me off. And I said, unfortunately, and I told him, I said, that has nothing to do with you, obviously. That has to do with the limitations of that person.
Yep.
So I said, the analogy that I look at is we take a person who is widely respected as a coach in his craft. And I said, let's take Phil Jackson, and I'm like, do any of us believe that Phil Jackson was a better basketball player than Michael Jordan or Kobe Bryant or Shaquille O'Neal or Dennis Rodman or Scottie Pippen or any of the Hall of Fame athletes that he has coached?
Right.
Do any of us think that Phil Jackson was physically more adept than any of those people that we just talked about? So the skill that someone like Phil Jackson brings to the table is not that he can out-jump or out-dribble Michael Jordan. It's the fact that he has put in the work and obviously continues to put in the work that is required to make Michael, to make Kobe the best Kobe. This is his talent and skill as a coach. So, like I said, I bring that up, of course, not to disagree with anything you said, but just
I don't think it does at all.
Yeah. So we have to understand the skills that these coaches bring to the table, and that is far different, to look at, say, a Phil Jackson versus someone who may be totally theory. They have all their plaques and all their degrees hanging on the wall and says, hey, this is why I'm a greater coach than you. And I'm like, well, what does your record show? Show me something other than those pieces of paper hanging on your wall that helps me understand why you're the great coach that you proclaim to be.
Right. The I think to drive the home point more accurately is that it's a plethora of skill sets to be a great coach. And one of those skill sets is the fact that you're still training. Mm-hmm. So if you have that removed, I'm not saying you're a terrible coach. I'm saying that you probably are lacking immensely, and you are hindering yourself because you have taken out a complete skill set, right? The fact that you are currently right now in the process of training is a skill set in itself to be a continued better coach, because you have the experience fresh. You're not rusty on anything. You know feelings, you know environments, you know what's going to happen, right? And essentially it keeps you from being out of reality.
Mm-hmm. Right. And to at some point you achieve I hesitate to say the level, but you achieve a certain amount of maturity as a coach to understand what it's going to take to get you to the next level in your ability to coach. Mm-hmm. So, I keep coming back to the Phil Jackson analogy, which means at some point his ability to coach his players on how to run plays, how to pass, dribble, and jump doesn't necessarily mean that Phil Jackson has to hire a dribbling coach. Right. Maybe he already knows the mechanics of dribbling, so he decides, okay, I need to work on my ability to communicate this information to this athlete. To figure out, okay, what analogy, what word picture can I paint so that this athlete understands the lesson that I'm trying to teach, or something along those lines. When it gets to that level of coaching, there are, it's mind blowing how many different variables come into play. But, just bringing it down to our level, there are an infinite number of skills that we need to be working on at any given time. Mm-hmm. And to me, it is more about the growth mindset that says each day I get just a little bit better at my craft. I get just a little bit wiser. I get a little bit smarter. I learn something to do, or I learn something not to do. But every day I learn to get just a little bit better at something. And to me, that is what separates those who become great coaches from just the subpar, the mediocre, the one who tries to stand behind his degrees or his accolades or what he achieved yesterday. Right. So that's what separates those two coaches.
Yep, absolutely.
And knowing how to recognize that is invaluable.
100%. And to sum that point up, Bob was 65 years old, and quarter squatting or not, that man was still under the barbell.
Right.
And that just goes to show that all else said, that just goes to show passion. I mean, seriously. 65 years old, 40-some years in the sport, multiple surgeries, and you still have the desire to get under the bar?
Right.
Are you kidding me?
Right. I venture to say that barbell had become a part of him, and as long as he was physically able to get under it, under some circumstance, that he was going to get under it.
That barbell was the third leg.
Right.
So awesome.
Yeah, definitely.
I think that's a good point to wrap it up on this one.
For sure.
That was definitely one of the best talks we've had so far.
Right. Lots of great information there, and
be spending all day tomorrow splicing this up. There's 1,000 splice spots I got put down. So this will be a good one.